everyone, Liz here from the Nail Hub, and today we are going to do another awesome nail audit. Today's nail audit was brought to us by Jess, and Jess was asking about going beyond the typical mixing of colors and getting into understanding more about how to create custom colors using things like pigment powders, glitters, and what some of those considerations for those products might be. So I've got some examples of some ways that you can create custom colors. I've also got some suggestions for you on how to do this with the most optimal outcome and reducing the amount of risk in having unwanted results. And then we'll go from there and I'll show you guys how to complete all of your mixing desires. Now, I could not find my color wheel this morning, but a color wheel is a great place to start if you're getting into mixing colors. A color wheel basically helps you understand primary, secondary, tertiary colors, how to actually mix colors together to get new colors. So if you've never done any sort of paint or gel mixing, a color wheel is going to help guide you getting to the color that you're hoping to mix. So I'm going to use a couple just really simple examples. For this example, if we're wanting to make a pink or a different shade of pink, let's say we only own white and red. We don't have pink. We can dilute our red with some white and create some different shades. So I'm using my silicone mat here. So I'm going to put the gel right on my table. And I usually like to start with just a couple dollops as if I'm, painting, just to kind of experiment with scooping some out with my spatula. Then what you're going to want is like an orange wood stick or a spatula, and you can take a little bit of each color. I'm just going to use like a little piece right there. And then I can start adding white to it. So if I add just a little bit of white, you'll notice it just starts to make a slightly lighter shade of that red, getting into more of a pink, almost the same color as my mat. A little bit lighter, we'd be matching the pink of my mat. Okay, so you want to mix that really well, but you can see really easily we were able to take two colors that we own and make a new color. And this is really awesome for situations where maybe you're starting out, starting to collect colors and also feeling pressured to buy more colors. Honestly, and Jess, I'm sure you were thinking about this because Jess's request actually included the fact that she has a hard time finding some of her favorite colors in different brands that have more hypoallergenic formulas. The interesting thing is that after all my years of working in nail care, I actually have never seen a color that was new to me. Now, in the beginning, it seems like all the colors are fresh and new and that only one specific brand has the color that you want. But it's actually well beyond that. It's one of those things where once you start looking at color and you start collecting colors, you start to realize that pretty much every color that's ever existed is already in existence across all the different brands. And a lot of times you don't need to buy every single color. You can actually make those colors, especially since color tends to be trendy. It's seasonal. It will be something that comes and goes. Instead of stocking up and putting all of your money into all of these individual colors that you may not actually use, you can pare down, focus on the quality of the formula that you're using instead of the quantity of the bottles, and you can actually invest in some really high quality product that's going to be better formulated and still be able to achieve all of those custom colors that are popular for that particular season, for example. Okay, so we've got this basic example of pink. Now, what you're going to want to do as you experiment is you're going to want to try and come up with some kind of eyeball measurement so that you can recreate this color if you need more of it, okay? And this is why batches are really important. You'll even see batch numbers on different gels, on different, if you're shopping for yarn, if you're shopping for anything that's been dyed or tinted, usually there is a batch number that comes with it. And that's because you want to make sure that you have enough of that batch so that you don't end up with variations in color. In this situation, you're going to be able to get it so close that the eye is probably not going to be able to discern that there's a difference. But I always recommend writing things down as you're experimenting. So if I took one small dollop of red and one small dollop of white, basically even portions, and I got this color, I could even smear a little bit of this on my notebook and, cure it into place. And then I can write down next to it and say, this was 1 equal part of lipstick and 1 equal part of Stark. And this is how I got this shade of pink. What I can do then is I can add more white. So I can go back and get a similar little amount of white, So this would be 2 dollops of white to 1 dollop of red, and I can make it a little bit lighter. So again, you'd want to write down how many dollops of white you put into that mixture so that you don't end up forgetting, oh, how many did I put? 2, 3, 4 to be able to get that beautiful shade of pink. And you can see it's almost exactly matching the color of my silicone mat, so that's really fun. Okay, so then what we can also do is we can start to mix primary colors. Now this is not primary blue. However, I can still show you guys, you can get into mixing a little bit of blue into this red to make a slightly different, more violet shade or more purpley kind of shade. So if we mix these two together, because that red is so dark, we're going to end up with a darker kind of maroony plum color. And I can also add some white to it to make it a little bit lighter if I want to. And again, you would write down exactly what you're doing as you're mixing them just to be able to replicate this. And you can end up with a really, really pretty similar type of pink, but it's got a little bit more of a purpley hue to it. So if you want to go cooler, you can add things like blues. If you want to go warmer, you can add things like yellows or oranges. And this is a really fun way, like I said, to experiment with colors that you already own. Okay. So Jess had said, hey, I really want, these specific colors that I love, but I'm having a hard time finding them in more hypoallergenic formulas. Is there a way to actually achieve custom colors? Well, this is the starter place for that. Then what we can do is also talk about pigment powders and glitters and how we can add those things into some of our colors or into our clear gels to start creating custom colors. If you don't have a silicone mat like mine, we sell these via our Nail Hub brand as well as Attain. They're great for mixing on. They're great for, just using as a palette. But you can also use a piece of ceramic tile. You can use a paper plate. You can use a little bit of foam backing. There's lots of different things that you can mix product on. Okay, so let's talk about glitter first, because usually after people get into mixing custom colors, and just using colors that are in their brand, they get into wanting to add glitter to things, because I don't know about you, but I think we all love glitter. All right, so I've got some basic glitter here. Now I'm specifically using some craft glitter from the craft store because I wanted to talk about some of the differences in powders, glitters, and pigment powders. So one of the considerations when it comes to glitters and also pigment powders is how they're made, what they're made of, and how that's going to react with your products. When it comes to nail products, for example, when we manufacture Attain, we are using cosmetic-grade pigments, and we're also considering how those pigments are going to interact with the different oligomers and different things that we're putting into, and some gel polishes even have solvents in them. You want to understand how that might react with that. Now, it's really hard to figure that out up front, and especially without being an actual chemist and formulator, it's especially difficult to get into that. However, there's a couple big considerations when it comes to mixing gel polish with glitter. The first one is make sure your gel polish does not contain things like nitrocellulose. Nitrocellulose is a very common solvent that is found in more hybrid type gel polishes, and it can actually eat off the color that's on a lot of these glitters. So typical glitter is usually a silver or metallic mylar type of backing that is then painted with a color. So this would be like a silver type of mylar material that then has a blue tint added to it. And what can happen when you mix a tinted glitter like this, a colored glitter, with a gel polish that might have solvents in it, like if you're looking on your ingredient list and you see nitrocellulose, it is possible that if you were to mix that up, leave it on the product in a jar and use it for later, you can actually have where the color starts to get eaten off the surface of the glitter. So next time you open up the jar, you'll have silver glitter flecks with tinted blue gel around it. Okay, so that's something that maybe you've already experienced or maybe you've seen, but that's one of the considerations. So cosmetic grade pigments are going to be very different. For example, Light Elegance used to make something called Pretties, and there's lots of different places you can get cosmetic grade pigments. You want to make sure that they don't have oils or anything in them like they would be for eyeshadow. A lot of cosmetics for the face, they already have oils mixed into them to help them adhere to the skin. So you're going to want to make sure that they're actual straight pigment powders. And look at, you know, the difference between a craft store glitter versus something that's going to be cosmetic grade, whether it's an actual powder or it's a glitter. Okay, so that's just something to think about. Because if you go down to, like I got this glitter at Michael's, this is the type of glitter that's meant to be used with glue for, you know, decorations on, you know, an envelope or, you know, something like that. This is not meant to be mixed with different types of cosmetic products that we would use on our body. Also, something to consider is in other sources of glitters and powders, there's also the possibility that they can contain heavy metals. So you can have things like lead in certain types of powders that you might buy online. So also consider the source, consider the price point, consider what's in them. And also you can request the actual profile for these pigments or these glitters to understand exactly what's in them. And if the company is not willing to provide that information, again, that's one of those red flags that I look for, just like I've spoken about with shopping for different nail products. Always ask for an SDS. If they don't have that ingredient list or that chemical profile for their product, or they're unwilling to provide it, that is something that I always say, hey, maybe go and look for a different source for those products. All right, so with glitters, one of the things that I like to always talk about is what types of products you're going to want to mix your glitters into. So I usually recommend reaching for a solvent-free base coat or a builder base. So I'm going to use the Teen Adhesion today, which is a perfect example. I like base coats mainly because they have the adhesion ingredients in them. So even if I'm applying, you know, pretty dry layers of glitter, that adhesion factor in that base coat is going to help grip onto the glitter, and it's also going to grip onto my nail and grip onto subsequent layers. If I'm using top coat tends to be a little bit more brittle of a product, so you could end up with cracking due to the dryness of mixing in the glitter. So let's talk about ratio, because that's really important when we're talking about getting the right consistency in our products. So I'm just going to start with a little bit of my base coat here. And like I said, the challenge with mixing dry glitters and dry pigment powders is that they're dry. So we need to be aware of the ratio of powder that we're mixing into our liquid gel. If it's too dry, you're going to end up where there's not enough gel to actually keep everything together. It can end up being really brittle on the nail, and you can end up with cracking and peeling and things like that. So usually what I recommend is that when you leave the glitter there for a second, you want to actually see it kind of self-level and become smooth again. If it's super, super, super textured and just does not self-level at all, or doesn't seem, it's kind of crumbly, then you've got too much powder. Okay, so this would be a good mix where after a few seconds, I can start to see it get glossy on the surface as the gel starts to self-level. I could even add a little bit more, but this is going to be nice because if I were to paint this on a nail, it is going to be textured, you know, that I'll need to actually maybe encapsulate this or put some top coat on it. However, it's actually going to self-level slightly, and it's not going to be too dry, you know, leading to some brittleness and cracking. And I'm also getting really nice opacity with it too. So unlike where you've got a lot of clear gel and a little bit of glitter and it's just kind of see-through, you're going to be able to get really, really nice thick glitter gels that are highly opaque and you know, without sacrificing that texture issue. Okay. So this is something to think about when you're mixing in glitters. And again, you can also do a test with your product. Leave the, you know, I can make some of this, put it in a little jar or, you know, somewhere in a little piece of plastic or something, put it away in my drawer, come back 24 or 48 hours later and see if it's eaten the color off of the surface of the glitter or if you've noticed any changes to it. Okay. So let's talk about pigment powders. So I only have a few pigment powders that I own, mainly in neon colors, and you can mix these into a white base. You can mix them into clear gels. You can also press them onto, if you've ever seen them doing it on matte top coat, like for a pigment ombre, you know, there's lots of different uses for these, but today we're going to talk about using them to actually create custom colors. So like I said, you know, think about the source of where you're buying these from. You know, if they're cosmetic grade, look into some of those things. And we're again going to just take a couple scoops of each. I'm really not a fan of these stacks because they just tend to be really difficult to work out of. I prefer individual jars, but I got given this a long time ago, so I still have this little stack of pigment powders. So let's do a little bit of pink and a little bit of orange just to create kind of a nice bright neon. And I have not done any of this before I got on camera, so we're just going to experiment together. So I'm going to take a little bit of white, because white usually is a great base to mix pigment powders into because you're going to get a nice opaque finish. It can actually, create more of a pastel effect, but we'll try this. And then also what we can do is use some clear gel as kind of more of our medium for getting everything to stick together. Because one of the considerations when we're mixing in pigment powders is, are we creating too opaque of a gel that light is not going to be able to penetrate into that product? So we have to consider, if we're just using a highly opaque white and we're mixing some pigment powder into that, are we actually going to be blocking more light absorption once the nail goes into the UV lamp? So I always like to have a little bit of clear to kind of keep things suspended a little bit more. So I'm not just mixing a ton of white into a product that's just going to make it more and more and more opaque. So let's take a little bit of powder. Let's take a little bit of pink. I'm just going to take a little couple corners and I'll just mix this in just to see what I get. What we should end up getting is kind of a jelly-like neon. It's going to be somewhat translucent because of that clear. So if I press this out a little bit, I can start to see it's got like a little bit of a jelly type of factor. And on camera, it's so funny. Neon pinks always end up looking a little bit more orange on camera, but this is actually a really pretty hot pink. Then what I can do is add a little bit of orange just to make it a little bit more fiery. And Jess was wearing a color that was kind of a hot pink red in her picture that she sent me, talking about, colors that she's trying to make. So I thought I'd make something very similar. Okay, so there is my, again, it looks super orange on camera, but it's actually much more pink. And then what I can do is take a little bit of that, spread it out. You can see I get kind of more of a jelly color. And if I add just a teeny bit of white to it, I want to see if this brings up a little bit of opacity. So it shouldn't really lighten the color too much, but it will actually help with opacity. And then we can look at, okay, how do I want to manipulate this a little bit more? So I can add a little bit more pink powder. And this is turning out really pretty. This is like a fiery coral pink with nice opacity. And again, I'm going to let it sit self-level just to make sure that it's not too dry. Usually the fact that a gel polish continues to self-level as if it was straight out of the bottle, that'll tell you that you've got the right mixture. So if things aren't self-leveling, that'll tell you that it's a little bit dry. Just like when we did with our glitter, if it's too textured, if it doesn't get glossy again, if it's not self-leveling, that means that your mixture is too dry. It might self-level a lot slower, but that is kind of an eyeball way to make sure that your mixture is still on point. Okay, so this I can also just do a little bit of a test just to see like what that would look like if I was painting it onto a nail. I've obviously got really dark nails, so the opacity is really nice. If I was using a brush, I'd get a nicer application, but this is a really great way to be able to mix pigment powder. So you're going to want to use a little bit of clear just to keep things well suspended and not make it too opaque that we're blocking light. Check your self-leveling factor, check that it still gets glossy and starts to self-level. That'll tell you that it's a nice ratio, it's not too dry. And then you can get creative with mixing all kinds of different things together. So you could even mix pink right into your white gel to make a hot pink color. But again, consider that it might end up getting super duper duper opaque and dry, so you might need to add a little bit of a dilution like a clear gel. Okay, so I can end up with a similar idea to what I was doing with my red and my white, except now I'm using more of a fluorescent pink powder to do that. If you would like to submit your own nail audit request, all you have to do is go to thenailaudit.com, fill out my form, upload at least one video or picture, as well as a detailed description for me. All of this information really helps me not only keep your request organized, but also a picture is worth 1,000 words and helps me fully understand what your question is and how I can best create a custom video to answer it for you. So Jess, I hope this helps you understand a little bit more about using pigment powders and how to actually invest in a high quality base product, whether it be colors or clear gels. That way you can achieve some of these really fun custom colors that you're looking for while also maintaining that focus on a more hypoallergenic type of base formula, more high quality sources for your products. And that is one of the things that I think a lot of people get swept into when they get into especially gel nail care, is that it is one of those things where it's a world of color. And a lot of the time, the marketing that happens with colors is one of the biggest ways that we're attracted to buy a specific product. That we see a beautiful color that we love and we just have to own it and put it on our nails. But then what ends up happening is that we forget about all of the other chemical portions of that. We forget about the importance of formula, of sourcing our products from reputable places. We forget about looking at ingredients because we get so hyped up about just the actual aesthetic of the product itself. And it's also really expensive to invest in a lot of colors. That's one of the things that's been happening in the gel polish industry since gel polish became super popular. It's one of those things where people want to be able to own all of the neons and all of the different shades of pink. And you can end up with 400 colors easily if you get into buying a world of color, which, at even $5 a bottle, that's a lot of money that gets invested into a gel polish. That's also one of the challenges that I see is that people are wanting more colors, so they reach for a $5 option instead of considering the quality of the ingredients in it and needing to actually go buy something that's probably $12, $15, or maybe even $17 or $20. The formulation of it is really, really important. So you can actually get less quantity but more quality and actually create those quantities in colors by custom mixing things. I also love this for one additional reason, which is I can only probably name maybe 2 salons that I've ever come across in all of my years of teaching and working. One of them was mine, and one of them was actually a colleague of mine that I saw that actually made an effort to create custom seasonal colors for their clients. Unlike a lot of salons where they just have a wall of color or some swatch sticks for people to choose from, or getting in a situation where a client brings you a nail polish color that they want to match and you're not prepared to do that, you can actually create a very unique environment, something that really wows your clientele by being somebody that comes up with custom seasonal colors that are popular for that season. So this fall, one of the most popular colors that I saw that was kind of an oddball color that you might not actually want to buy and own in your arsenal was chartreuse green. I love chartreuse, and we actually have chartreuse in our Attain lineup, but that's one of those colors that is probably only going to be popular for one fall season or maybe in the spring. And it's also one of those colors where, you can't always find it across lots of different gel polish brands because it is more of an oddball color. But chartreuse was in all kinds of fashion items across everything that I saw this fall. And chartreuse is definitely one of those colors that you could custom make if you wanted to do that. Have it on hand to show that you're trending, that you've got things that are up and coming, and you can custom make it, put your own name on it if you want to, and make that part of what you offer your clientele. So instead of, like you've noticed maybe with our Attain line, if you've checked it out, instead of offering 400 different colors, you can pare down to just a handful of them and create those custom mixes. Also, by having some neon pigments on hand or some different glitter options, and also playing around with mixing those colors together, all of those things are going to allow you to make hundreds of colors if you want to experiment and get creative. So I hope that helps you feel less pressure to buy a whole bunch of stuff. That way you're going to be able to utilize that same money to invest in some quality product. Now, the other considerations that I mentioned today that I wanted to go over one more time are we want to make sure that we're using the same brands of colors if we are mixing 2 or 3 or 4 colors together. when we start to actually mix different brands of formulated gel polishes together, there can be issues with the different ingredients that come across those brands. So stick with the same brand if you're going to be just mixing two existing or multiple existing colors together. A color wheel is going to be super helpful. You can get one at a craft store, you can get one online. Color wheels are very helpful in understanding how to mix colors together to get other colors that you're trying to achieve. Pigment powders are great, but you're going to want to consider what's in them. So stay away from, some of those cheaper sources, because I have actually seen a lot of lab tests that show that there's heavy metals like lead and things in some of the pigment powders or cosmetic powders that you can find online. So go to a place that's like a makeup artist type of source, or even a really high quality, artist paint store. Usually they will have true pigment powders that have been tested, that don't have heavy metals in them, and are approved for use on skin, such as cosmetic grade pigments. Okay, so that's why cosmetic grade is so important. And that's also why you won't see a lot of brands like Light Elegance offering things like cat eye gels or other stuff. A lot of those magnetic powders actually are not necessarily cosmetic grade, and they do usually contain heavy metals in them. So that's something to consider, just understanding why some brands don't offer some of these more trendy products, and it's because they're more concerned about putting those types of pigments into a gel and selling it to their followers. Also, ratio is going to be really important. So mix ratio can have an effect on blocking light from our UV lamp. It can also affect brittleness of the product, where it peels, it cracks, things like that, especially with chunkier products that we're mixing into it. And also consider that solvents in your gel may actually eat away at things like glitter coatings, pigment powders, and alter the ultimate result. So testing things ahead of time to make sure that they're color stable is a great way to actually start, where you mix a little bit, put it into an opaque jar, or put it into a little plastic baggie or something, or even keep it on your palette if you want to. Put it into a dark place like a drawer, and go back 48 hours later and see if anything has changed before you actually put it onto a nail, because that is something that can actually alter the product significantly depending on what's in your actual gel to begin with. And last but not least, I did not show this today because I don't own a ton of acrylic or dip powders, but you can also experiment with mixing dip powders into gels to achieve some new colors. So if you already own some dip powder, and maybe you wanted to move away from glue because of things like dip flu and all of the solvent issues that we deal with actual nail glues, dip powders are something that's great to mix into clear bases like gel, as well as even mixing them in with some of your colors. Acrylic powder, although it is going to add a little bit of grittiness and a little bit of texture, in general, acrylic powders are going to be using cosmetic grade pigments as well. So it's a great resource if you already own some of those to start experimenting with some of that stuff too. All right, so I hope this helps all of you feel more creative, understand all the implications of mixing up some custom colors. I'd love to actually hear how this went for you if you decided to experiment. And also, I think this is a great way to make your business more unique if you are working as a nail technician and wanting to actually offer more to your client on a budget. And no matter who you are, being able to actually focus on quality instead of quantity is going to make sure that you're working with safer products without breaking the bank. All right, see you guys next time. Bye.